She didn't know his name. She didn't ask. It was 2 in the morning, she hadn't eaten since the shift before, and the order she was supposed to deliver had gone cold an hour ago. So she sat on the curb and opened it herself. And then she slid it across the wet concrete to a stranger. That one decision, made in 30 seconds on an empty stomach in the dark, would reach all the way to the top of a billion-dollar empire. And tear it apart from the inside. Rain-slicked street at 2 a.m., a delivery bag, a cracked phone screen face up in a puddle, the notification light still blinking. Another docked rating, another missed bonus. Serena sits on the curb eating from the container she was supposed to deliver. She's not crying. She just looks hollowed out. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been keeping it together for too long, in too many directions for too little return. An old man in filthy clothes sits a few feet away, watching her. Not begging. Not speaking. Just watching, with eyes that don't look lost. They look like they've seen too much and chosen deliberately to stop. She notices. She pushes the container toward him. I gave him my last meal on a night I hadn't eaten in 16 hours. I didn't do it out of kindness. I did it because his eyes looked like someone who had already lost everything. And I recognized that. I didn't know then that I was looking at the man who had helped build the system I was surviving. I just knew I recognized the look. That was enough to act on. This city doesn't hate poor people. It just doesn't see them. It was built for movement, goods, capital, data, all of it flowing fast, all of it optimized. The skyline tells you who matters. Glass towers where decisions get made. Basement kitchens where the food gets packed. And somewhere between the two, on a scooter in the rain, a woman named Serena, carrying someone else's dinner, running on nothing, raided by strangers who will never know her name. She was 28 years old. She worked 3 delivery platforms simultaneously, rotating between them to avoid the penalty windows. She knew every shortcut in a 4-mile radius. She knew which restaurants packed orders loose, so they'd shift in the bag. She knew which customers would report her regardless. And she was good at her job. Exceptionally good. The kind of good that goes unrecognized in systems designed to extract, not reward. But here is what the algorithm could not account for. Serena noticed people. Not as obstacles. Not as ratings. As people. It was the one thing about her that cost her everything. The one flaw, if you could call it that, in an otherwise precise survival strategy. She would stop. She would see. And it would slow her down every single time. Meanwhile, 40 floors above the street she worked. A different kind of machine was running. CO Logistics. 42 countries. 11 billion in annual revenue. Its operational headquarters were in Seoul. Its workforce was everywhere else, including this city, where the glass towers and the basement kitchens and the rain-slicked routes between them were as good a place as any to extract what the company needed and leave the rest. And at the head of it, CEO Junho, 36, composed, fluent in the language of quarterly returns. The kind of man who had learned very early that sentiment was a liability, and efficiency was the closest thing to virtue the market would reward. His father, Seo Woon, had co-founded the company. 7 years ago, the board declared him unfit. Cognitive decline, they said. A liability to shareholder confidence. The paperwork was clean. The exit was quiet. And then Seo Woon walked out of a hospital in Seoul. And disappeared. No search party. No public appeal. The company issued one statement, and then the silence was total. Junho never looked for him. There was one thing people who had worked closely with Junho noticed in the years after his father disappeared. He had kept nothing. No photographs on the desk. No objects from the old offices. Nothing carried forward, except one habit. Every quarter, without explanation, he reviewed the original founding documents of the company himself. Not delegated. Himself. His assistant had been instructed never to schedule anything else in that window. Whether that was grief or strategy, or something the two of them had agreed to in a room no one else was in. Nobody knew. In this city, the invisible take care of each other. The visible pretends the invisible doesn't exist. What nobody tells you is what happens when those two worlds accidentally touch. He knew she would be penalized. He told her so. And she gave him the food anyway. 30 seconds. A container pushed across wet concrete. No drama. No eye contact held too long. Just a tired woman making a quiet decision that made no financial sense whatsoever. What Serena did not know, what she had no reason to know, was that the man sitting on that curb had once run a company with more logistics infrastructure than most governments. That he had signed off on policies that made her job possible and her life impossible. That he was not lost. He was hiding, not from the law, not from creditors, from himself, or the version of himself he could no longer justify. Seo Woon had spent 7 years on the streets of the city his decisions had reshaped. He ate what people gave him. He slept where the city permitted. And every single day, he watched the machine he had helped build chew through the people it was never designed to consider. That was the penance. To watch. To be unable to stop it. To carry the weight of knowing exactly how it worked, and having no longer any right to say so. Here is what she did not know yet. What none of this could have told her. The man sitting across from her on that curb had not simply fallen through the cracks of the system, she was surviving. He had drawn the blueprints for them. He ate slowly that night, with a precision Serena noticed and said nothing about, the particular stillness of someone whose hands remembered a different life. When he finished, he handed the container back. His hands. She saw them for just a moment in the light from a passing car. Scarred across the palms and along the fingers. Burns, old ones healed into ridges. A specific pattern, the kind that comes from a particular kind of industrial accident, not a kitchen, not a fire. She looked. She moved on. The mind does that, catalogs what it cannot yet use, sets it aside without ceremony. It would come back to her later. Everything always does. He said thank you before she stood up. 2 words. But the weight behind them was not proportional to a meal. As Serena later put it, he said thank you in a way that sounded like an apology for something much larger than a missed meal. The complaint came in at 2:47 a.m. 1 star. Order not delivered. No further comments. By morning, Serena's account had been suspended. 72 hours. 3 days without income. On paper, a minor disciplinary measure. The kind of friction the platform described in its terms of service as a quality assurance mechanism. In practice, it meant a phone call she didn't want to make. Her brother was 17. The treatment plan the hospital called manageable, a word that means expensive and ongoing and entirely your problem, ran on a schedule that did not pause for platform disputes. She had been keeping him alive on tips, and now the tips had stopped. The next installment would be short. She did not call anyone. She did not post about it. She sat at her kitchen table with a notebook, actual paper, a pen, and she worked the numbers until they balanced. Barely, but they balanced. $6,840. The remaining balance on her brother's treatment plan, due in installments the hospital had agreed to hold until the end of the month. She said the number out loud once, the way you say a thing to make it real rather than catastrophic. That was Serena. Not unbreakable. Just unwilling to stop until she found the way through. 2 days into the suspension, she went back to the late-night route anyway. Not to work, just to move. Sometimes the body needs the familiar geometry of a problem it knows how to navigate, even when the problem itself is temporarily out of reach. Her scooter was parked on the corner near the underpass when she saw him. Seo Woon, standing beside it, holding a paper cup. Inside, coffee. Black, from the cart on the corner she stopped at every night before her first pickup. She had never told him. He had simply watched long enough to know. She stared at the cup, then at him. How do you know what I drink? He said it was a cold night, a deflection so practiced it barely registered as evasion. And then he sat down on the wall nearby and said nothing further. He was there the next night, and the night after. Not following her. Not speaking unless she spoke first. Just present. A fixed point at the edge of her route, the way a landmark is present. She told herself it was strange. It was strange. She kept working. On the 3rd day, a representative from the platform's customer relations division called and asked if she'd come in for a review. She almost didn't. The night before, another platform had reached out, a smaller operation, fewer routes, steadier treatment. No risk flags. A clean start. The representative had been clear. Come in, sign the new terms, and the old complaint would be absorbed into the onboarding process. Forgotten. She had the email open for 40 minutes. Then she closed it. If she transferred quietly, the complaint against her stayed buried. The restaurant owner's account, the one that had put something true on the record, went nowhere. She wasn't willing to do that. Not for a clean slate she hadn't earned by telling the truth. So she went to the review instead. The meeting was held in a glass-walled office that smelled of fresh carpet and filtered air. The kind of environment designed to make the person across the table feel the distance between their world and yours. The representative was polite, measured. He walked through the incident log. Serena gave her account without elaboration, without naming anyone, without asking for anything. And then the representative said something she was not prepared for. The restaurant had called in. Not to complain. To clarify. The owner had explained that the customer, whoever he was, had been satisfied. More than satisfied. And then, unprompted, the owner had mentioned something else entirely. That Serena had been sharing meals with an elderly homeless man in the area regularly, more than once. That the staff had noticed. That they wanted it on record. Serena sat very still. She had not told anyone. There was nothing to tell. It wasn't a gesture, it wasn't a campaign, it was just a thing she did because she could not do otherwise. But someone had been watching. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. Something the representative couldn't quite categorize and Serena couldn't quite name. It did not have a name. It did not have a structure. He was there when she arrived. She brought extra when she could. He spoke in observations, about the city, about the way the light changed over certain blocks at certain hours, about patterns in foot traffic that suggested which restaurants were struggling and which ones were quietly expanding. He noticed everything. He offered it the way some people offer small gifts, without expectation, without explanation. She listened. She did not ask where the knowledge came from. He never explained himself, and she never pushed. There was an unspoken agreement between them that some things were being held in suspension, that the full accounting of who each of them was would come later, or not at all, and that neither of them had the bandwidth for it right now. The weight of what wasn't being said sat between them like a third person. Neither of them named it. Not yet. Then one night, a customer came out of his building to meet her at the curb. Wealthy. Impatient. The kind of man who had organized his entire life around never having to tolerate inconvenience. The order had gone lukewarm, not cold lukewarm, because he had taken 11 minutes to come down from his apartment after she'd sent the arrival notification. He did not consider this relevant information. He screamed at her on the pavement. About professionalism. About standards. About what he was paying for. Serena stood and absorbed it. Her face gave nothing. She had a system for it. A place inside herself where she put things like this until she was somewhere private enough to feel them properly. Woon watched from the wall. He said nothing until the man had gone back inside. Then, quietly, without looking at her directly, I used to be the man who built the system that put you on that scooter. I thought efficiency was neutral. I was wrong about that. Serena was quiet for a long moment. She did not soften. She did not rage. She looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who has already survived too much to be easily destabilized by a confession, even a significant one. She asked him one question. What did you do with that knowledge? Silence. Not the silence of a man who hadn't heard. The silence of a man who had no answer he could live with. He had no answer. And she let that stand between them without filling it. She did not soften the question and she did not repeat it. She simply left it where she had put it and waited. That was the most clarifying and most dangerous thing about her. Not the asking, but the willingness to let the silence after it stand until it meant something. He carried something with him always. A piece of paper, folded into quarters, tucked into the inner pocket of a jacket that had once been expensive and was now just worn. He touched it sometimes without opening it, the way people touch things they are not yet ready to read again. She noticed. She never asked. He carried his guilt the way poor people carry debt. Quietly. Permanently. Without the option of bankruptcy. What neither of them knew, what they had no way of knowing, was that the meetings had already been noted. Junho's platforms generated data at every level, complaint logs, flagged accounts, delivery route behavioral patterns. Serena had been marked weeks earlier. A suspended account with an unusual review outcome, cross-referenced with route data that placed her nightly in an area the company had separately flagged for labor organizing activity. The overlap was incidental. The flag was not. The internal language companies use to mark workers they believe are organizing others. A pattern had been logged, a flagged worker, same location, same hours, consistent secondary presence. The platform did not need a name for what it was tracking. It only needed the pattern to repeat. They were already on a timer. They just didn't know it yet. It arrived on a television mounted above a drinks refrigerator in a restaurant where Serena was waiting for an order. On a Tuesday night, between a weather update and a commercial for a credit card she would never qualify for. The press conference had the texture of a coronation. CEO Junho stood at a podium in front of a wall-sized graphic. Clean lines, bold projections, the visual language of inevitable progress. The announcement was framed as innovation. A last-mile logistics network. Fully automated. Nationwide rollout within 18 months. The journalist narrating the segment used words like groundbreaking and transformative and sector-defining. And then, almost as punctuation, almost as a footnote to a story that had already moved on from him. The company was co-founded by Seo Woon, who disappeared 7 years ago under disputed circumstances. One sentence. Then the segment continued. Serena's order wasn't ready yet. She kept watching. They cut to archival footage. Seo Woon younger, at a factory ribbon-cutting ceremony. Dark suit. Composed expression. The posture of a man accustomed to being photographed. The camera panned across the assembled executives, caught him mid-applause. And for just under 2 seconds, his hands were visible. She had seen those hands before. Serena did not move. Her expression did not change. The order came up. She checked it, packed it correctly, walked to her scooter, and completed the delivery. But something had shifted in the architecture of everything she knew. Because now she had a name. And a name is not just identification. A name is a thread. And this particular thread ran from a homeless man on a night shift curb all the way to a boardroom announcing the elimination of thousands of jobs exactly like hers. It ran through 7 years of deliberate disappearance. Through a son who had never looked. Through a company that had erased its own co-founder as cleanly as it intended to erase its workforce. She had not asked for any of this. She had given a stranger her dinner. And now she was standing at the center of something enormous, holding information that could detonate in any number of directions. None of them clean, none of them without cost. The question was not whether she knew. The question was what a person does when they know. Knowing someone's name changes nothing about who they are. But it changes everything about what you're responsible for. She didn't confront him. She just said his name. His full name. Quietly. The way you say a thing you've been holding carefully for several days, making sure you had it right before you put it down in front of someone. That was enough. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man caught. It was the silence of a man who had been waiting, for longer than he could reasonably explain, for someone to finally say it out loud. He reached into his jacket. The folded paper. The one she had watched him touch 100 times without opening. He unfolded it slowly, with the deliberateness of someone handling something that had been handled too many times already. The creases gone soft, the paper worn thin at the folds. It was a letter, written to his son. 7 years ago. Never sent. Not a confession of abandonment. Not an explanation of disappearance. Those would have been easier. This was something harder. A precise, unflinching account of what he had built before he left. The policies he had approved. The communities the company's expansion had fractured. The workers whose livelihoods had been restructured into something unlivable, efficiently at scale, with his signature on the documentation. He had written it in the week before he walked out of the hospital and into the street. He had carried it every day since. He had never sent it because he could not decide whether sending it was an act of honesty or an act of self-relief. Whether he was confessing for his son's benefit or simply trying to lighten a weight that he had decided he did not deserve to put down. Serena listened to all of it. Then she said, "Your son is about to automate out 10,000 people like me. And you're sitting here doing penance on a curb." Woon said he had no right to walk back into that world. She said, "You have no right to stay out of it." He told her he had disappeared to protect people from himself. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she told him that was the most selfish thing she had ever heard. Removing yourself from the wreckage you created is not protection. It is just a cleaner way of leaving. She did it at 4 a.m. But she had been sitting at that table since midnight. For hours. The notebook open. The numbers that did not improve no matter how many times she ran them. Her brother's name written at the top of the page the way she always wrote it. Not as a reminder, but as the reason the page existed at all. No one to talk her out of it. No one to talk her into it. Just the specific weight of a decision that was going to cost her something real regardless of which way she went. And the slower, quieter weight of knowing that one of those costs she could live with and one of them she couldn't. By 4 a.m. the weighing was finished. What remained was the acting. She did not send the letter to Junho. That would have been personal. A family matter. Something that could be absorbed quietly, managed internally, buried under the same corporate machinery that had buried everything else inconvenient about Seo Woon's existence. She sent it to a journalist. A specific one. A woman who had spent 8 months covering the automation expansion, who had written with precision and without sentimentality about what last-mile automation actually meant at ground level. Not the projections, not the efficiency gains, the people, the routes, the income structures that would simply cease to exist once the network went live. Serena attached the letter. She attached a second document as well, a scanned board memorandum Woon had shown her, bearing internal reference numbers, pilot site codes, and timestamp metadata embedded in the file header. She photographed the printed copy with the date stamp visible. In her email, she included the document identifiers and asked the journalist to verify them against former employees named in the memo. She pressed send, and then she sat there in the quiet for a long time. She knew what it would cost. The account, certainly. The income she had built across 3 platforms through 2 years of faultless navigation and absorbed indignity. Gone, not suspended this time, but terminated. The kind of termination that travels between platforms, that makes reactivation somewhere else difficult and slow. Her brother's treatment plan had a payment due in 11 days. She had done the numbers before she sent it. She had done them after. They did not improve. She did it anyway. And the audience is left to hold that without resolution, because there is no clean answer to what Serena did at that kitchen table. It was not reckless in the way recklessness usually presents itself, impulsive and unexamined. It was fully examined. She had looked at every cost clearly and chosen anyway. Whether that is heroism or devastation dressed up as principle depends entirely on what you believe people in impossible positions are permitted to do. Woon found out the next evening. He had seen the journalist's name appear in his peripheral awareness of the news cycle. The way people who have spent years avoiding something still track it instinctively from a distance. He understood immediately what had happened and how. He was not angry. He was frightened. For her. With the specific fear of someone who knows precisely how large the machinery is that has just been notified of her existence. He said, "You didn't have to do that." She said nothing. He had no answer for that either. The journalist contacted Seo Logistics for comment at 9:17 a.m. By 9:34, the inquiry had been escalated to Junho's private security team. By 9:51, it was in front of Junho himself. Along with the letter. His father's handwriting. 7 years old. Never sent. Detailing in precise and unsparing language exactly what kind of man Seo Woon believed himself to have been, and what he believed his son was continuing to build in his absence. Junho read the letter in full. His face gave nothing. No grief performed for the room, no rage, no recognition he was willing to show. Just a man reading very carefully words written to him by someone who had chosen disappearance over a conversation. In the quarterly review window his assistant was never permitted to fill, he had read the founding documents of this company every 3 months for 7 years. He had never said why. Now the room had its answer. Everyone in it read something different into his silence. There was no correct answer available in that room. She burned her livelihood to light something she couldn't name. That's not heroism. That's just what it looks like when someone has stopped pretending there's a safer option. The story ran on a Thursday morning. By Friday, 3 separate labor advocacy organizations had issued statements. By the following Monday, 2 legislators had requested a formal review of the automation rollout's projected workforce impact. By the end of the week, Seo Logistics had announced, in language so carefully constructed it said everything and committed to nothing, that the expansion timeline was under internal reassessment pending stakeholder consultation. Not stopped. Delayed. Under review. In the language of corporate consequence, that is as close to a flinch as you are likely to see. Serena's account was permanently terminated the same morning the article published. Not suspended. Terminated. The notification was not subtle. It was not meant to be. It was the machinery communicating in the only register it knew, swift, clean, and entirely legal. She had known it was coming. She had known it the moment she pressed send. Woon was gone. Not in the way he had gone before. Not the managed disappearance of a man erasing himself from a world he had decided he no longer deserved to occupy. This felt different, like someone who had finally, after 7 years, done the one thing they had been unable to do from a distance. He had left something at her scooter. A folded envelope. No name on the outside. Inside, a letter. Not to her. To the journalist, signed in full with his legal name and former title. A corroboration of everything Serena had sent. An account, in his own words, of the policies he had approved, the communities the expansion had fractured, the workers whose livelihoods had been restructured into something unlivable, efficiently, at scale, with his signature on the documentation. The things he had written to his son 7 years ago and never sent, now sent to the one person whose publication of them he could not control and could not stop. He had not asked Serena's permission. He had not needed to. She had already told him what the only acceptable answer to her question was. No note for her. Just the letter, and beneath it a cashier's check. $6,840. Not a round number. Not an approximation. The exact figure she had said out loud at a kitchen table on a night she thought no one was close enough to hear. He had been close enough. He had remembered. Serena stood on the pavement and looked at both for a long time. The check cleared. What came after that, the story does not say. What happened after that, the story does not tell you. Whether Junho got in a car and drove to find his father, or whether he folded the corroboration into a drawer and returned to the business of running an empire, the story does not say. Whether the automation expansion was ultimately stopped, or merely slowed long enough for the attention to move on to something else, the story does not say. Because the story is not about outcomes. It never was. What the story is about is a woman on a scooter in the rain. The city lit up behind her, indifferent and luminous and entirely unchanged. She rides. She has always ridden. Through the suspension and the scrutiny and the terminated account and the enormous consequence of a 30-second decision made on an empty stomach on a wet curb at 2 a.m. The city does not change. She moves through it differently. Just the quality of attention we bring to it. Just the decision made over and over again in small moments that no algorithm can see, to notice. She had spent years noticing everyone but herself. The scooter. The rain. The route she knew by heart. She was still learning to include herself in the count. She didn't save him. She didn't fix the city. She gave a stranger her last meal and set off a chain of things that couldn't be undone. Which is, depending on who you ask, the definition of either compassion or catastrophe. Most things that matter are both.